what I thought might be useful is to talk about the impact of the upheavals in the Arab world on the Middle East conflict, and particularly with regard to the positions, the strengths, and political weaknesses of the Palestinians and the Israelis. The conventional wisdom, which I'm sure with which you're mostly familiar, is that these upheavals have strengthened the Palestinians and weakened the Israelis. They've strengthened the Palestinians, the conventional wisdom goes, because there's the rise of Islamist movements, most notably in Egypt. The fall of Mubarak was a blow to the position of the Palestine Authority, headed by Mahmoud Abbas, the authority that's supposedly supposed to engage with Israel in devising a two-state solution. Mubarak was Mahmoud Abbas's strongest backer. His fall and the replacement of Mubarak as president of Egypt with Mohammed Morsi, who had been a member of the Muslim Brethren, presumably, since the Muslim Brethren has been virulently anti-Israel, against the whole idea of the legitimacy of a Jewish state, this endangers Israel. Also, we know that the Morsi government has lost substantial control over the Sinai Peninsula, presenting all kinds of dangers on the border to Israel. I'll talk about that in a little more detail in a bit. So the notion is that the Middle East is much more hospitable to maximum Palestinian demands and the idea of confronting Israel, and that Israel is facing more tensions, more dangers, even from countries that had brokered peace agreements with it, and that again, the view from Israel sees more conflict than the prospects of peace. This is the conventional wisdom, and like most conventional wisdoms, there's more convention than wisdom in it. And so I want to unpack it to sort of look at what is reasonable, what some of these assumptions and conclusions, what are reasonable and what need to be revised or rejected. Looking specifically at the Egyptian-Israeli situation, we know, to return to the issue of the Sinai Peninsula, that the Egyptians have lost control of the Sinai Peninsula for the following reason. They've really lost control of a lot of the institutions that had propped up the Mubarak regime. Again, for a variety of reasons, when Mubarak fell, Egypt was left with institutions that functioned, institutions like the army, the court system, the police, but it wasn't clear once he fell what the scope of their authority was. So each of these institutions was in some ways was fighting for turf, and afraid, at the same time, afraid of overstepping its ground because there were confrontations by other forces in Egypt. So in essence, the police walked off the job. There's a lot of crime in Egypt now, and the police and the army people who were stationed in the Sinai were under lots of pressure from the Bedouin tribes there that had operated pretty autonomously even under Mubarak, had been marginalized by Mubarak, whose only livelihood is smuggling. The fall of Libya gave them more weapons to smuggle. They smuggled both illegal refugees, people trying to make it out of war-torn Africa. So they they began to operate more freely, and the police and the army didn't want to confront them, and that also gave space for different Islamist groups like different jihadi groups to get involved in the smuggling operations and to get involved with the Bedouin who were leading some of these. Interestingly enough, the loss of security of Sinai has hurt Egypt as much as it hurt Israel. Many more Egyptian police and army people have been killed than Israelis who were the targets of one or two terrorist raids. The Bedouin and the Islamist groups blew up the pipeline that delivers natural gas to Israel and Egypt 14 times, but that, ironically, hurt Jordan more than it hurt Israel. So it's not clear that losing Sinai or losing control of Sinai is really in the interest of Egypt. In fact, the army people say it's not, and we know that the two times in the past that Nasser, the previous ruler of Egypt, lost the Sinai, it weakened his position in Egypt. So the kind of tension that is going on between Egypt and Israel is something that Israel is much more can handle much more easily than Egypt itself. Israel has it costs more. You have to change your strategy, but they can provide security for the border areas. It's also the case that Israel has been able to protect its borders even as the Syrian regime falls apart. If we look at the recent Gaza conflict, the Gaza conflict, I think, illustrates the extent to which Egypt is following what we might say is a policy that Mubarak, that was followed in the past for Egypt's national interest, and is not much different from the way Mubarak handled the first Gaza conflict in 2009. That is to say, in the 8 days of Israeli clashes with Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the Egyptian government expressed sympathy with Hamas, allowed certain rulers from Qatar and other places to express sympathy, in some cases to visit the Gaza Strip, but in the end concluded or pressured Hamas to agree to a truce that is largely the kind of truce that was in Israel's interest. That is to say, they stopped the rockets. The Israelis didn't do very much in the way of providing more concessions to Hamas. And Hamas became, because of this, Hamas became much more dependent on Egypt and lost a good deal of its capacity to make its own decisions. And so you have to ask, if the Palestinians seem to be more dependent on the Arab world now than they were before the Arab upheavals or in the last several years, what does this do to the chances for Palestinians serving their own interests, providing some sort of conclusion to the conflict that Palestinians want on their own terms? And that, I would say, we can answer that, and we can provide some answers if we look at Palestinian history a little bit. The Palestinians, for a very long time, were entangled in the regional politics in the Middle East, so that what happened in Syria, or what happened to Palestinians in Syria or Lebanon or Jordan or Egypt, had to do with Syrian interests primarily, Lebanese interests, Jordanian interests. So the Palestinians were not really able to make their own independent decisions with regard to what they wanted, what they could pursue. Yasser Arafat, the strength of Yasser Arafat, the positive legacy, let's say, that he left was that he was able to gather more and assemble more autonomy for the Palestinians. Very difficult for a variety of reasons, but still what has happened to the Palestinians since his death, and particularly since the changes in regional politics, is that the Palestinians have become more dependent on a variety of political forces in the Middle East. Up until the Arab upheavals, the regional politics were divided between those countries like Jordan and Egypt that would accommodate Israel, that would find some way to broker a peace, that wanted some political solution, versus those like Syria, Iraq under Saddam Hussein, though Hamas, those forces that wanted to confront Israel. The change that the upheavals brought, for a variety of reasons, is that division is no longer the division that governs regional politics. The division now is between those who are pursuing the interests of the Sunni countries or the Sunni Muslims, and those who are pursuing the interest of the Shia. And there, the Palestinians are caught in another crossfire. They're ignored financially at this point. They are having a lot of trouble collecting on the pledges given by the Gulf states. The Gulf states have other things on their mind. And so the Palestinian issue, which for a long time was the prism through which most young Arabs really understood not only the region, but America themselves. Many of the people who started the revolution, the occupying Tahrir Square, learned how to organize by involving themselves in protests for the Palestinians in Egypt under Mubarak. That kind of focus, that kind of prism is becoming marginalized at this point. Now, is that good for the possibility of peace or bad for the possibility of peace? It's very difficult at this point to imagine a Palestinian leader who has both the status, the credibility, the authority to undertake the kinds of decisions that would be required to conclude an agreement with Israel. There's almost no combination of forces that you can imagine that you could put together that would lead to an agreement as it stands at this point. That ought to be emphasized here is that while there seems to be a stalemate at the political level, Palestinians and Israelis go about their lives. More and more Palestinians are are demanding changes in their school system so that the graduates of high school can take and pass the Israeli matriculation exams. More and more Palestinians are looking for, who have residence passes and permission to live in Jerusalem, are looking to stay there to be able to take advantage of Israeli social services, Israeli healthcare system. There's more and more of a kind of small but growing economic cooperation between Palestinians and Israelis. So even while there's a stalemate at the political level, and even while you read very pessimistic articles about what is happening at the political level, remember that's the political level. And on the day-to-day, and on a day-to-day basis, you have a lot of coexistence, cooperation, and positive developments. You have more and more Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship who are becoming members of the middle class. More and more education. So there are lots of things that are happening at that level. The other, the last point I would leave you with is Yasser Arafat decided to embark on the Oslo Accords. I mean, there were steps before that, but he decided to embark on a peace process because the PLO was ignored in the Middle East. There had been an 8-year Iran-Iraq war that focused the attention again on Sunni-Shia splits. There had been the first Gulf War where Arafat his reputation was tarnished by being a supporter of Saddam Hussein. So the PLO was in a way up against the wall, and it sought peace as a way to get back into action. So even though most pundits and political scientists who follow this would tell you there doesn't seem to be much to hope for on the political level, it's not without the, it's not entirely impossible to imagine that something can move on that level when the Palestinians actually are ignored and not the center of regional attention.